Lesson 8, I will round multi-digit numbers to any place. So in Lesson 7, we learned how to round multi-digit numbers to the thousands place. And today we're going to learn to round to any place. And your first do's today are going to be none. We're just going to do the problems in order today. All right, so we're going to begin with our problem set, and we're going to take a look at problem number 1A. Now the directions say, complete each statement by rounding the number to the given place value. Use the number line to show your work. So if you'll notice for number 1A, it says 53,000 rounded to the nearest 10,000 is blank. So we're going to use our vertical number line just like we did in the last lesson. And we're going to look at 53,000 and we're going to ask ourselves how many 10,000s are in this number. Well, there are 5 10,000s since we're rounding to the 10,000s place. So 5 10,000s is written like this. What would be one more 10,000? Well, it would be 60,000 or 6 10,000s. So now I'm looking for my halfway point. What would be halfway between 50,000 and 60,000s? Well, halfway between 50 and 60 is 55. So halfway between 50,000s and 60,000s is 55,000s. So now I have to put 53,000 on my vertical number line, and the 5's are the same, but the 3 in the thousands place is less than the 5, so 53,000 is going to be below the midway point, which means that 53,000 rounded to the nearest 10,000 would be 50,000. We're going to go right straight down and we're going to take a look at B. So this time we're going to do 42,708 rounded to the nearest 10,000. So again, I'm going to ask myself how many 10,000s are in 42,708? Well, the answer is 4. So 4 10,000s in standard form is 40,000, and one more 10,000 would be 50,000s. Now, I'm going to stop right here, and I want you to try to do the rest of this problem by yourself. So go ahead and pause the video and think about what would you do next and do as much of it as you can. If you get stuck, press play and I'll walk you through it. Okay, so hopefully you pause the video and you try to do this by yourself. Something magical happens in your brain when you stop and think about the problem and try to do it by yourself instead of just copying with me. All right, so I had to think about what was my midway point. So midway between 40 and 50 is 45. So midway between 40,000 and 50,000 is 45,000. And then I put 42,708 below 45,000 because the 10,000s are the same, so I had to look in the thousands place. Now, because it's less than the midway point, that means that the closest 10,000 is 40,000. Okay, so let's take a look at C. Now C is just a little bit tricky. The only tricky part is getting it set up. So if you take a look here, you're going to notice that in C, we don't just have 10,000s, we have 100,000s. And sometimes that's very confusing to kids. But if you'll remember that 100,000s are 10,000s too, they actually have 10 10,000s in them. So when I ask myself how many 10,000s are in this number, you're going to say, well, there's 0. Well, there's a 0 in the 10,000s place, but these are actually 10,000s too. So actually, this would be 40 10,000s or 400,000s. And one more 10,000. Now, a lot of kids want to just add 1 to the 100,000s, but it doesn't say one more 100,000. It says one more 10,000. So that would be 410,000. Because if this has 40 10,000s, one more would be 41 10,000s. So what would be halfway between 40 10,000s and 41 10,000s? Where you're thinking, 40 and a half. So let's think of it this way. What would be halfway between 400,000 and 410,000? Well, that would be 405,000. That's the trickiest part of this problem. The rest of it is pretty much the same as what you've done before. I want you to pause the video and try to do the rest of this by yourself and see which 10,000 is 406,823 closest to. Okay, so hopefully you finish this problem by yourself and you realize that 406,000 is more than 405,000. So in this case, our number is closer to 410,000. So we actually rounded up this time. All right, now we're going to go back to the top of this page and we're going to take a look at 2a. Okay, so for 2a, we are now rounding to the nearest 100,000. So if I've got 240,000 and we're rounding to the nearest 100,000, what would be, how many 100,000s are in this number? Well, there are 200,000s. So we're going to put 200,000. And what would be one more 100,000? Well, one more would be 300,000s. So what would be halfway between 200 and 300? Well, that would be 250, right? So if halfway between 200 and 300 is 250, then halfway between 200,000 and 300,000 is 250,000. So now I'm coming back up here and I see that this is 240,000. Well, where would 240,000 go on our vertical number line? Well, it's less than 250,000, but it's more than 200,000. So it goes below the halfway point, which means that it's closer to 200,000. All right, hopefully you're starting to get the hang of this. All right, let's look at B now. So again, we're going to round to the nearest 100,000. I would like for you to try to do this one all by yourself. Pause the video and see how far you can get by yourself before you have to press play. Okay, so let's take a look here. 449,019 has 400,000s. So it comes between 400,000 and 500,000, with 450,000 being the halfway point. It's less than the halfway point, which means that it rounds to 400,000. All right, let's take a look at problem C. Okay, so let's think about how many 100,000s there are in this number. There are 9, right? There are 900,000s. What's one more than 900,000s? Well, that would be 10,000,000s. Well, I can't really put a 10 here, so if you think about that, if I had 10,000,000s, I would bundle them together and move it to the left. So it would actually be 1,000,000. So what would be halfway between, let's think of this in terms of thousands. What would be halfway between 900,000 and 1,000,000s? Well, halfway between 900 and 1,000 would be 950. So halfway between 900,000 and 1,000,000s is 950,000s. I think you can do the rest of this problem by yourself. Let's pause it and you finish it. Okay, so 964,103 is greater than 950,000, which means it's closer to 1,000,000, which would be to the closest 100,000. All right, let's flip our paper over on the back and let's take a look at this application problem. So when we do application problems, we're going to use the read, draw, write a number sentence, and write a word sentence process. So let's begin by reading. 975,462 songs were downloaded in one day. Round this number to the nearest 100,000 to estimate how many songs were downloaded in one day. Use a number line to show your work. So now we're going to draw. They actually tell us they want us to draw a number line. So that's what we're going to draw. We're going to draw a vertical number line. And it tells us to round this to the nearest 100,000. So once we get here, we're basically taking this number and we'll round it to the nearest 100,000 just like we did on the front side of this problem set. So first of all, I have to ask myself how many 100,000s are in this number? Well, there are 900,000s. This is very similar to 2C because 1 more than 900,000 would be 10 hundred thousands, which turns out to be 1 million once we bundle those 10 hundred thousands together. And our halfway point is the same as the last problem too. It's still 950,000. So now I've got to figure out where 975,462 belongs on this vertical number line. Well, my 9s are the same, but when I go to the 10,000s, this number has a 7 10,000s. So that means it's greater than 950,000. So 975,462 would be above the midway point, so that means that it rounds to 100,000. So now I have to write a number sentence. In this case, I didn't multiply, divide, add, or subtract, so my number sentence can look like this. 975,462 is about 1 million. So that would be my number sentence. So we drew a number line, we wrote a number sentence. Now we're ready to write an answer or a word sentence answering the question. So we're trying to figure out about how many songs were downloaded in one day. So we can say about 1 million songs were downloaded in one day. I really like this read, draw, write, and write process because it really helps you to stay focused and to make sure that you're answering the question properly. All right, let's take a look at question number 4. So again, we're going to begin by read, draw, write, and write. RDWW. This number was rounded to the nearest 10,000. List the possible digits that could go in the thousands place to make this statement correct. Use a number line to show your work. All right, so we read. Now it tells us again to draw a number line. So we're going to draw a number line. Now this one's a little bit different because we're not taking a number and rounding it. We're actually trying to think backwards. So we have a number that rounded to 130,000, and they were rounding to the nearest 10,000s. Okay, so when I round a number, I could round, the number line could look like two different numbers, right? Because I could have 130,000 as my greatest 10,000. So this number could be, well, actually I couldn't, because could this number be less than 130,000? There's no way. So now that I think about that, my number line couldn't look like that. 130,000 would have to be the bottom number, because with the first two digits being 1 and 3, then this number has to come between 130,000 and the next 10,000. So the next 10,000 could be 140,000. So this is 13 10,000s, this is 14 10,000s. So this number rounded to 130,000. So what would be halfway between 130 and 140,000? Well, that would be 135,000. So whatever this number is, it couldn't be above 135,000 because if it were, it wouldn't round to 140,000. So whatever this number is, it had to be less than 135,000. So what are the possible digits that could have been in this blank? What digits would be in the thousands place to keep this number below 135,000? Well, it could be 131,000, right? And that would be a 1 in the thousands place, which would be the missing digit. It could be 132,000. It could be 133,000. It could be 134,000. What would happen if this number was 135,000? Well, it wouldn't round to 130,000, right? It would round up to 140,000. So these are the numbers that would fill in the blank. So we drew our number line. Now we're going to write our number sentence, okay? So we're going to fill in this blank. We could say that this is 130,000 1,644. I'm going to use a semicolon. 132,644. 133,644. I skipped. Nope, I got one more, sorry. And then 134,644 are all about 130,000. So that would be our number sentence. Now we're ready to answer the question. It says, list the possible digits that could go in the thousands place to make this statement correct. So I'm going to say the possible digits that could go in the thousands place are 1, 2, 3, and 4. What about 0? Could it be 130,644? Yes, it could. We better go back and change that because it could have been a 0 too. All right, so then we'll just add right here 130,644, and then I'll go ahead and put a 0 right here. So it could have been 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 now that I think about it. All right. Last question. Estimate the difference by rounding each number to the given place value. So when it says estimate the difference, that means that we are going to be subtracting. So if I want to know about what the difference is, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to estimate both of these numbers. It asked me to estimate both of them to the nearest 10,000. So I'm going to draw two vertical number lines. And I'm going to begin by rounding 712,000 to the nearest 10,000s place. So 712,350. So in the 10,000s place, I have a 1. So this will be 71 10,000s. And one more would be 72 10,000s. So what's halfway between 710 and 720? Well, that would be 715. And since we're talking about thousands, that would be thousands. So now I'm going to figure out where 712,350 goes on the vertical number line. Where do you think it goes? Well, hopefully you said it goes in the bottom part because it's less than 715,000. So I've got 712,350, which means that 712,350 is closer to 710,000. Now I'm actually going to erase this and move this number line over a little bit because I put it a little bit close. All right, so let's move it over. Now I'm going to round 342,802 to the nearest 10,000. I'd like for you to pause the video at this time, and I want you to try to round this number to the nearest 10,000. Remember, if you get stuck, you can always press play, and I will walk you through it. Okay, so let's take a look here. So hopefully you figured out that 342,802 has 34 10,000s, and one more 10,000 will be 35 10,000s. And halfway between 340,000 and 350,000 is 345,000. So then you had to figure out where it went on the number line. Well, 342,000 is less than 345,000, so it would go down here, which means that this number would round to 340,000. Now you are ready to find the difference. So now we have 710,000 minus 340,000. So all of my zeros are going to stay the same, and this will be 0. So now if you remember, I cannot take 4 from 1, so I have to regroup, and the 7 would become a 6, and the 1 would become 11. So 11 minus 4 is 7, and 6 minus 3 is 3. So this would be about 370,000. So now you're going to do the exact same thing again, except this time you're going to round to the nearest 100,000, which honestly in this case I think is a little bit easier. I want you to try to draw two vertical number lines just like we did in problem A, but this time I want you to round each of those numbers to 100,000 and then subtract and see what you get for the answer. If you get stuck at any time, you can press play and I will walk you through it. Okay, so here you can see that I started by rounding 712,350 to the nearest 100,000. So this number has 700,000s, and one more 100,000 would be 800,000, with 750 coming between 700 and 800. So 712,350 is less than 750,000, so it would be in the bottom part of my vertical number line, which means it rounds to 700,000. All right, let's take a look at 342,000. Well, 342,802 has 300,000s. One more would be 400,000. Halfway between 300 and 400 is 350. So my midway point is 350,000. Well, 342,802 has a 4 in the 10,000s place, so that means that it comes below 350,000, which means it rounds to 300,000. So now I'm ready to find the difference. So if I had 700,000 minus 300,000, that would give me 400,000. So if I estimate it to the nearest 10,000, I would have 370,000, and if I estimate it to the nearest 100,000, that would give me 400,000. So in this lesson today, we round it to the nearest 10,000 and to the nearest 100,000. So I hope that you understand how a vertical number line can help you to do this. You just have to remember what you're rounding to and look to see how many of those are in your number before you draw your vertical number line.